I want to go to our guests. We're going to call him Multipolar Bear because we don't necessarily want to out the person's identity because of, obvious reasons in regards to potential retaliation. But he's a Sri Lankan political activist. Welcome to the show, my man. Thank you for joining us again. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks.
Excellent. So I want to get into the issue.
How are you?
So far, so good. Better that you're with us. Last time we had you with us, I greatly appreciate that conversation. You were able to give a context that is not necessarily being bubbled up, either in the way that it's being reported, or for that matter, for the West. And it's a context that makes sense. You often have people taking advantage of political situations and political turmoil in order to advance their own political objectives. Yes, it's a crisis, but crisis in many respects are a reason for getting things done. From the standpoint, one of the questions that I basically had was, who is running the government now? The president has basically said on Wednesday that he was going to resign the moment that a new government had been formed. What is occurring? Who is leading the country currently? Let's start there.
Okay. Currently, our president has left the country, and our prime minister is the acting president right now. So he is in charge of presidential duties as of now. So the Air Force confirmed that the president had left to the Maldives, and the Maldives later confirmed that he has left to Singapore from the Maldives. So, the prime minister is also being asked to resign by the protesters. Like one of their demands is
right,
that he resigns as well. He has agreed to resign on the condition that somebody who is qualified to take both roles at the same time is brought forward first, as in to take up the role of the prime minister and the president. If there is somebody fit, he will give in his resignation. So the parliament is convening tomorrow, and they will have a vote on the 20th of July as to who our new president should be. If Gotabaya Rajapaksa, our current president, resigns first. So that is the current situation.
Wow.
With our presidency.
That is super interesting. Is there any idea on who may take that role up to this point?
That is the biggest question right now, because there is no one who has been democratically elected or qualified to take up these roles.
Right.
So we are a little concerned about it. And we do appreciate that the president kind of preserves his security at this time, because we do not want to go the Libya way.
Yes.
For example, during Gaddafi's time, we don't want that to happen in Sri Lanka. So it's better to have, if there is a change of regime, to have it peacefully happen than to have it to happen over the death of one president.
Was that a fear? Gaddafi was basically dragged out of his compound and sodomized with a machete. Was that a fear of this protest? I guess what I'm asking him, was it that level of anger and rage where something like that could have basically taken place?
It's difficult to say, but they were definitely violent from day one. The protesters have been pretty up in arms since day one, but there isn't a fear as grave as with Gaddafi's situation. Right. But it's best to be in a safe place.
Precaution.
That is just precaution is better.
No,
yes,
I totally understand. That makes sense. That does make sense. One last thing before we're getting into foreign, I want to get into this notion of how other countries play into this. Before we get into that, you made the point last time you were here, and again, you're free to say what you believe is taking place. Don't hedge yourself. I'm not looking for anything in particular. I just want what's true on the ground and the way that you define it. And you made the point of saying, look, this protest, it's not entirely organic. that there were elements that were basically egging this on in order to, one, pull Sri Lanka away from the Russia-China orbit in one sense, but also to institute loans from the IMF that would basically force the country to take certain actions like privatizing either issues of healthcare or other aspects of the economy. Can you expand upon that for me before getting into the other issues? I just want the audience to hear it in case they weren't here the last time you were here.
Yeah. So the protests started actually 1 week after Victoria Nuland's visit to Sri Lanka. So the earliest organizers of these protests were private NGOs, foreign NGOs in Sri Lanka, and of course, and certain other foreign organizations through mostly Telegram and lesser used like social media like Telegram, because Telegram is not very popular in Sri Lanka right now. So it was mostly organized through these means, and in the earliest protesters were mostly upper middle class and middle class folks, like Sri Lankan citizens who've historically had a kind of disagreement with the way of our country's dealings. Usually we are a democratic socialist republic, and most of the upper middle class and middle class people align with more liberal ideologies, and they do want more liberal policies within the country. So the Rajapaksa regime does not cater to that. So that was used to organize these people in the earliest of times. Of course, because the problems in the country are real, and because we do have a hard time with fuel, with gas, with food prices increasing, later on, of course, more working class people too joined into the movement. And right now, it is mostly among, you can say, social media users, because most of these protests are organized through social media. There is not much organic meetings, if you know what I mean. Like, there is no organic gatherings happening. There are no places that they are all meeting to discuss what they will do next. They are mostly organized on social media. There is, for example, the last protest on the 9th of July were organized mainly on Facebook. They all planned it for about a week or two and decided to meet up in Colombo. So these have been the nature of the protests, and the main demand of the protest is that the president goes home, but they do not have an answer for what will happen afterward.
Right. We just want you to leave, but we don't know what happens. We just want you to get out, basically. Is it?
Yeah, we just want
to play benefit of the doubt.
We just want,
or to play devil's advocate. Isn't that still indicative of something organic? Like, take the NGOs out for the moment. If I want to, let's say, push for Medicare for all, I'm here in the U.S., and get on Facebook, I find a bunch of other people on Twitter, Facebook, Telegram that agree with me, and we show up. Why is that not organic? It's organic from the standpoint of the population and what they actually want from a value set. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying social media doesn't necessarily make it inorganic. Or am I wrong on that?
In Sri Lanka's terms, less than 50% of the population use social media. Actually, a very small population of Sri Lanka uses social media, and even in that percentage, very few are avid or active social media users. So that is one thing. So you cannot actually have a full-blown nationwide movement through just organizing on social media, because most of our country is working class. They are in rural and non-urban backgrounds, and they hardly have, I think, they don't really use smartphones or social media for that matter. That's one thing that we need to keep in mind. But at the same time, these protests do not have any tangible demands like, okay, we want fuel, or we want some relief in food prices,
Right.
or please or asking the government to put price controls on our food, because those are the signs of an organic protest,
I see
because
what
they
you mean.
have clear demands, they have clear tangible demands about their own lives that will translate to their well-being directly. But they do ask, their one and only demand is that the president goes home. They do not have any other demand. And the reasons for our energy crisis in Sri Lanka were very clear. One thing is that we are highly hydropower dependent, and we have not been getting enough rainfall for a while. That combined with the fact that our North Chole plant was broken down and the energy prices increasing was what culminated in our power cuts. And this is not something that the government has much control over. It's actually an organic problem that we are having, and it's part of the part of an international problem, and it's also environmental. So, knowing these things, these people are asking only for the president to go home. I'd rather that they ask for the government to put up price controls on goods or something similar that will actually impact people's quality of living directly.
Well, that brings up the point, I guess, that if the next person comes in, I know you don't necessarily know who that person is going to be. And I guess the policies and everything else that is going to kind of follow whoever that person comes in. But has there been any plan that has been put forth, even by Parliament at this point, to deal with the energy crisis, deal with the issues of inflation and everything else that are befalling the country? Because whatever president comes in or whoever takes power after has to deal with that. That's probably going to be the main problem on the marquee for them to solve. So has there been any movement up to this point in order to resolve that issue, or at the very least, even any ideas on how to resolve that issue?
Yes, actually, this government, including the prime minister, has been in negotiations with Russia for an oil deal, so that we can move towards buying oil from Russia instead of our usual buyers. We have mostly bought oil from India up until now, but the rising fuel prices is not a good idea for buying from India any longer. So we are trying to move towards buying oil from Russia instead, which will give us a better flow of fuel to the country at a price that we can actually afford for a long period of time.
Yeah.
So there have been arrangements made, and there are discussions happening as we speak for both LP gas and fuel.
That's the rub
from Russia.
That a lot of people don't realize, that because of what has been taking place, the amount and the cost of fuel has skyrocketed. So other countries have a much harder time, especially like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, have a much harder time affording the cost of the oil. Europe can pay for that extra cost. They can afford to pay that extra expense. But what they're paying for is basically bidding up the cost for everybody else that has to deal with it. I want to get into, for a moment, India and other countries that may have influence in what is taking place right now. What is India's impact on the crisis here? And does it have an impact at all? I know you mentioned the oil itself, or the gas, or the energy that is coming from India. Is there anything else? Is there any other political impact that other countries are having in this conflict currently?
Well, one thing that is hard to hide or hard to ignore is how India is getting a little threatened or a little afraid of China's influence in the country. To be honest, we have always been a close diplomatic friend of China's, and China has been one of our oldest diplomatic friends in terms of modern times. Ever since the rice and rubber agreement was signed with China, we have had close ties. We have enjoyed close ties with China ever since then. The USSR were also a close diplomatic friend. However, China's ties with us precedes any diplomatic relations with the USSR, now Russia. So we have, so that has culminated into what we have right now of an important part of the BRI taking place in Sri Lanka, which means that Sri Lanka is a very crucial part of the maritime BRI route, the maritime Silk Route. Sri Lanka is an important stop in that route. We connect, Sri Lanka connects the East to Africa and to Europe. So our stop in the Indian Ocean is very crucial for the flow of the BRI to happen efficiently. So I think, I can't say I think, it's very obvious that there are attempts to counter this influence in the country. So India and Western media in general have been voicing their concern over China's increasing influence in the country. But at the same time, it must be noted that Chinese influence in the country has not put any debt-related pressure on Sri Lanka. In fact, it has improved our quality of life incredibly, actually, because most of these loans were not completely taken out from China, like the projects that were China built in this country, for example, the Hambantota-Colombo highway, are not completely China funded. Some of the funding did come from our government, and some of the funding came from China, but the engineering came entirely from Chinese engineers and Chinese engineering corporations. It has, the highway in particular has connected the poorest part of the country with the richest part of the country. And the newest development is the port city that is being built in Colombo. It is actually this, for some reason, this particular project that has been getting most attention from the West and from India in particular. How can I say this? The port city is due to bring us billions of dollars in revenue each year. Once completed, I think about 11.8 billion just from rent itself. Wow. Within Port City. So for a country our size and an economy our size, that is a big income. That is a very large income just from rent. So there have been, for some reason, there have been concerns coming from the West and from India about, I think it has to do with the location. They feel threatened that there is like a growing Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean, so close to their country, because everybody knows that China and India have very serious border issues going on in India itself. But apart from this, there is no growing threat of Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean, because they are simply trying to build
port city.
Yes, build an efficient maritime route and an efficient Silk Route. Basically, bring back the Silk Route that used to exist,
Right.
so that we can improve regional cooperation among the Asian countries first, at least. And because the Silk Route was one of the reasons why Sri Lanka was extremely rich in the past. It was also the reason why India was also very economically strong in the past. So they're just trying to reinstate that. And we are also very happy that these projects are taking place in the country. So because we want to see our country prosper.
Of course.
So,
of course.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. So whatever president takes in, the economic influence, how can I say this? Those projects, all of the people in that country know that those projects are to the benefit of the country itself. They have to. I mean, you're talking about billions of dollars that Sri Lanka is going to get as a result of the development projects. So regardless of this, let's say, hesitancy or from, let's say, other nations, larger nations, whether it's the West, India, whatever, the country itself and whatever political leader takes hold, would they ever be able to do anything about those projects based on political pressures of the country itself? Meaning, regardless of what India wants, regardless of what the West wants, regardless of the pressure that may be coming in from the various, let's say, the capitalists in the country who want to undermine the democratic socialist system and privatize many of these industries, that ultimately, though, they're stuck with this notion that if they do anything about this, there's going to be all sorts of political pressure against them in trying to get rid of the port city. Meaning, it doesn't matter what India wants in this case. It's the country itself that is bettered by Chinese influence. And regardless of who takes over, they're going to have to deal with that reality. Is that true? Or is that, is that too, I don't know, is that too Pollyannish? Am I thinking about what has to happen in regards to the leader who comes in, regardless of what their political inclination is?
Well, with the current projects that have been started, any new leadership will not be able to affect what happens with those projects because we have to now go through with them. However, the prospects of any new projects taking place or being received in the country may wane if a new presidency who is more West aligned shows up in the country. We don't know who that's going to be because it's a very gray area right now. There is actually no one qualified for the job, and this is not election season, so we are a little concerned about that. But apart from that, they're not going to be able to affect any ongoing projects. The previous regime, which was in charge from 2015 to 2019, did attempt to halt the Port City project, but they were not successful. It's going to have to go through at this point, but any new projects may not happen.
Right.
At the same time, there is some concern that too much instability in the country may scare off Chinese investments in the country, or any foreign investments for that matter. That there is a concern that continuing unrest in the country may scare off any foreign investments in the country. So there is that concern.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that the foreign unrest will continue? Not the foreign unrest, but the unrest will continue? Or is it something that you think is, I don't know, momentary? Meaning it's something that basically happened, but it's something that could basically correct itself going forward? Or do you think this unrest is going to be going on for the foreseeable future, even after the new elections?
Yes. So we have to look at the nature of the protest right now as at this moment, what's going on with them, to see if this will go on in the future or not. One thing the IMF has kind of demanded for this round of negotiations is that we bring stability in the country by answering the protesters' needs, by essentially asking the president to resign. So that was one of their demands this time, for the IMF loan to be handed to Sri Lanka. But as usual, this round came out with no agreement with the IMF because the government did not agree with their terms. Apparently, we are not fully aware of what their terms were. So that's one thing. As at the same time, the protesters, there is a lot of division among the protesters right now. So the newest developments that happened on July 9th led to a more serious situation yesterday, on the 13th of July, where a local socialist, a utopian socialist organization named the Frontline Socialist Party tried breaking into the parliament, and they broke into the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. Mm-hmm. And so these new developments are now scaring away the original protesters, like people who were originally in this movement from day one.
Yeah.
are now moving away from their alignment with the protest, because they say, okay, this is not us. We don't want this. We do not want this socialist organization coming in and disrupting our movement. Because this sort, in any uprising, divisions are normal.
Right.
However, these protests these new developments are causing the older protesters to now resign from the protest.
Interesting.
One of the main players in this protest from the beginning was the Sri Lanka Lawyers Association.
Right.
And they are also now backing out from supporting these new developments in the movement. So there is a chance that this may lead to some kind of disruption of the movement as a whole, or it may continue. But we hope, yeah.
No, well, I was just going to ask, is there any threat to Parliament itself? I mean, yes, the protesters went after the president and the prime minister. Like you said, they burned down the prime minister's house. But is there any threat to Parliament in and of itself in their choosing another president? Meaning, is there any pressure on the members one way or the other?
Currently, the Parliament is also divided up to a certain extent. However, that they have not been successful at bringing up a good contender, a competent new option to replace the president, because I personally think that it's a little unconstitutional, because it wouldn't be a leader that the people chose.
Right.
Because in November 2019, President Gotabaya was elected by an overwhelming majority by the people.
Oh, I see what you mean. Your point is, it's not Parliament's job to choose the president. That's your point.
Yeah, because I don't think it's within their. It's not up to them to choose a leader for the country. I think it should be someone who is competent, and the prime minister's condition for resignation is, I think, a little fair. But at the same time, I do hope that if a new president is voted in by the parliament alone, that it will be someone who takes care of Sri Lanka's longtime friends and does what's best for Sri Lanka.
Let's end it on that. That's a really good point. I really appreciate your take and your explanation of what is taking place on the ground. Oftentimes in media, we get kind of details and we get, okay, here are the problems associated with it, but we don't get what the political machinations are undercovers, meaning behind the scenes on something. Yes, there's an event. Yes, there's a crisis, but is there something being taken advantage of in the context of that crisis? Or is there something else going on? And you explain that greatly. So thank you for this. I really appreciate this. This was Sri Lanka, political activist. We don't want to give her name because she's basically there in the middle of it. We want to keep her safe. You guys are listening to